Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Friday, May 3rd. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Akron game in 120 days, the game against Michigan in 211 days. Transfer portal window closed on Tuesday night. Wanted to give it a little bit of time to make sure all the paperwork had really gone through before we officially proclaimed Ohio State has hung on to all 5 of its scholarship quarterbacks. But against all odds, it appears that Ohio State has hung on to all 5 of its scholarship quarterbacks following spring ball. So I wanted to talk about why and where that leaves this year's battle for the starting quarterback job. We're going to be doing that with our buddy Tony Gerdeman of BuckeyeHuddle.com. Tony, I know everyone, we're supposed to be the all-seeing, all-knowing everything. I will raise my hand and say I did not think there was a particularly high chance that Ohio State was going to hang on to all 5 of its scholarship quarterbacks in the weeks following the end of spring practice. Are you surprised at all about the fact that all 5 guys all decided to stick around for the season?
I will admit, Tom, that there are times this spring watching the team at practice and seeing what I'm seeing, thinking there's no way that all 5 guys are here in May, June, July, August, and so on. Does that make me wrong? We're not here to talk about that, but you have 5 quarterbacks as that's a luxury, and you don't necessarily expect to stay luxurious for long in the quarterback world with the transfer portal. But yeah, there was definitely a time this spring where it's like, well, they won't have 5. They'll have, the question was, will they at least have 4? That was probably the bigger question. Like, well, if you were to handicap the number, like what are the most likely numbers? I think you're 5, and then is it 5 or 4 is the most likely number? Then is the next most likely number 5 or 3?
Yeah, I would have probably said 4, then 3, then 5, because you have seen over the years the quarterback position is a very unique one in college football, where you go back in certain classes and you look at the top 10 quarterbacks in the class, and 8 or 9 of them finish their college careers somewhere other than where they started. And these are the top level players. And that this is generally the deep end of the pond where Ohio State is fishing in its quarterback recruiting. And because you can only generally play one guy at a time, that means you've got guys who are very talented, very well known, very sought after, who are then have to make a decision. If I'm not going to start, do I stick around or do I go somewhere else where I would be very sought after, very talented, and probably be able to start this year? And that is a decision that generally a huge percentage of highly touted quarterbacks have decided, if I'm not starting, I'm going to hit the portal, I'm going to go somewhere else. And sometimes that works out and sometimes that doesn't. You see, for every Joe Burrow, there are probably multiple guys who have made 2, 3, 4 stops. A lot of the guys who Ohio State has had in recruiting classes in the past, Emory Jones, for example, had a multiple stop career and never really panned out. So you can, Tate Martell had a multiple stop career and never really panned out. You can go back through a lot of those guys and you keep hopping. Now I'm blanking on the name, but there was the guy who started at USC and then went to Georgia and then went to
JT Daniels.
JT Daniels, yeah. And then went to, I think, the Pitt, and then went to Rice and then retired last year. I mean, that is, that's basically your, like working for IBM 30 years ago, where you're just constantly moving every year. That feels like that's kind of almost more the norm in the college quarterback career than having everyone stick around. And I don't know what quite to attribute this to. Is it what this season could be at Ohio State? Is it that the quarterback competition really is still fairly open, and theoretically you could have any number of guys, and the true freshmen are true freshmen, so you're not necessarily expecting to go in and play right away. And theoretically, if Will Howard starts, Will Howard is out of eligibility next year. If Devin Brown starts, Devin Brown could leave for the NFL after next year, and then Lincoln Kienholz, Julian Sayin, and Air Noland all could potentially be the starter a year from now. What do you chalk that up to?
Well, before I answer that, I'll just mention there were 11 quarterbacks drafted in the NFL draft this past year. 7 of them were transfers. had transferred at some point. And the top two, Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels, were transfers. And then Drake May stayed at North Carolina. Michael Penix was a transfer. J.J. McCarthy stayed at Michigan. Bo Nix was a transfer. Spencer Rattler was a transfer. I believe Jordan Travis was always Florida State. And then you have Joe Milton, who was a transfer. Devin Leary was a transfer. Michael Pratt, who I think was always at Tulane. So that's 7 of the 11 transferred from one place to the other. Now, why did we not see any transfers? My theory on this is that Devin Brown believes that this is a battle and that he is still firmly in the competition, and Will Howard believes that as well. Now, we've seen what Joe Burrow firmly believed that he was in a competition as well, and he's like, it doesn't matter, I'm going to LSU, I'm going to hit the portal. But I think those two guys are still legitimately believing that they're vying for the battle. Lincoln Kienholz this spring said, if I don't win the job this spring, or this, I think he was talking specifically about the spring, I will just use the experience to help me try to win the job next year. Like, if I don't win it this year, that's going to help me try to win it next year. So he's always been talking about next year as an Ohio State quarterback, and this year helping him be a better Ohio State quarterback next year. So I think it's okay to believe what he said. And then, like you said, with the two freshmen, neither one of them came in expecting to win the job. They're just kind of watching everything else happen. But Air Noland, seeing what happened with Julian Sayin and seeing that elevation, it wouldn't have been a surprise there, where you're like, well, now do I have a decision to make? But also, Tom, I think there are benefits for a quarterback to be coached by Ryan Day and coached by Chip Kelly and develop for a little bit. Joe Burrow graduated from Ohio State before he went off. How many guys that have left and transferred out without spending a considerable amount of time at Ohio State have been better off for it regarding the quarterbacks? And maybe the reason they've transferred out and weren't productive is because they weren't good enough to play at Ohio State, so they left. But it's not a surefire next step to progress to leave Ryan Day's umbrella.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I'm just thinking back through, obviously, where Joe Burrow is now, but Matthew Baldwin went to TCU, had, I think, a knee injury and never really played there. Tate Martell went to Miami, didn't really play there, went to UNLV, didn't really play there. Jack Miller went to Florida, played sparingly. I think he played in one of the bowl games where they had like 30 opt-outs and they got killed by Oregon State. But he never really turned into a regular down in Florida. They've just, a lot of those guys have not panned out over the span of those years. And that's, I think, the reality of the transfer portal is, if you're not, if you go in the portal, the grass is always greener until you get there, and then maybe it's not. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. We've seen plenty of guys go into the portal and have good careers where they landed, but it is far from a guarantee, and that's especially true at the quarterback position. So now there are still 5 guys in that quarterback room with the portal window closed. So Tony, I'm going to ask you to handicap the race for the Ohio State quarterback job coming out of spring right now. And you can do this. You can give me percentages of likelihood that they're, if everyone's healthy, we're just going to stipulate if everyone's healthy, percentage likelihood that each of these guys is taking the first snap against Akron in 120 days.
Percentages, I would say right now I'm at the number that I have in mind is different than the fact that when I think about Ohio State this season, I picture Will Howard as the quarterback. So when I'm thinking about this season, my mind is 100% it's Will Howard. So that kind of has to be the number, but there is no such thing as 100. My mind, Tom, the way it works is the preponderance of the evidence. It's very legal, but I would say 75% that Will Howard wins it, 24% for Devin Brown, and 1% for the other 3. I think it's either of those two. And the fact that Will Howard comes in, has a ton of experience, does some different things. I still have questions about how good he is because we have not been able to see him operate with an offense like Ohio State in terms of the skill that he has around him. He might be outstanding. I don't know. Kansas State has produced NFL quarterbacks before, So, there's some precedence there, but like you watch him and, I did the 5-game, 6-game breakdown that I did of him back in the winter. I still don't know how well he throws downfield because it just wasn't a big part of Kansas State's game. It's going to be a big part or a bigger part of Ohio State's game with the weapons that they have. But I would say, like I said, in my mind's eye, he's the starter, but I can't go 100. And even saying 75 seems like a lot. It seems like it's unfair to Devin Brown, who is returning and fighting for the job. But I would be, at this point, I would be surprised if Devin Brown starts, just because you don't bring in Will Howard to have him be your backup. But I do believe that this is a competition. Devin Brown can absolutely win the job. I just think Will Howard's going to.
And I think that's probably a pretty reasonable view on things. And of course, the reality is we're putting stipulations on this where everyone's healthy. Well, what are the odds everyone's healthy? Well, I remember Joe Burrow going into camp at Ohio State in the battle for the number 2 position and then breaking his hand. And boy, did that change some things about Ohio State football history in the summer camp of 2017. So, the reality is, I think you could see 3 of these guys start a game this year, potentially, if you have an injury. We've seen Devin Brown have health issues and have ankle injuries and miss a bunch of time. There are no guarantees with a running quarterback, and all 5 of these guys are running quarterbacks to one degree or another. That tends to correlate to more injuries, just getting banged up a little more often. And with the longer schedule, again, I'm just going to put $1 in the jar every time we talk about the 16 to 17 game schedule and the way that's going to test your depth. But the reason we keep talking about it is because every time we talk to coaches about stuff, they bring that up, and they are very cognizant of that. And someone is going to get hurt, whoever whether it's the starter or the backup. And number 3 is going to become number 2, and number 2 might become number 1. And so, yeah, there are a lot of possibilities in terms of how this season shakes out. But is it beneficial to Ohio State, Tony, to have 5 guys with not identical skill sets by any means, but maybe similar skill sets where they all can, they all can pass at, at least let's say a B level, and they can all probably run at least a B level. And you may have some A's and A pluses in there somewhere, but is that beneficial for Ohio State to have really similar models of quarterback this year? Or would it be more beneficial for them to have the true pocket passer versus the, really run first kind of guy?
I think we've seen over the years that when there is a red zone quarterback, it works flawlessly, Tom. You can go back to Tate Martell. You go back to Devin Brown. When you've got that guy, that change of pace guy that can come in when nobody expects it and run the ball at the quarterback position, yeah, that's a no. It's to have all 5 guys be able to do that where you don't have to bring somebody in or change something up or this is your specialty. I think Ryan Day has come around on the idea like it's not bad to have a guy that can move around. But as Chip Kelly said after the spring game, we're not looking for running backs that can throw. You want your quarterback that can move around, and that's what they'll be doing. And now that the difference between the starter, like CJ Stroud, and the backup is not so vast, you're more willing to lose a guy, to get a guy hurt, which is like, that's a terrible way to put it, but you're more able to withstand an injury. So you can run that guy. You didn't, Justin Fields, you're praying like, gosh, I hope he doesn't get more hurt, because what do you have behind him? You've got a true freshman in CJ Stroud in 2020, but in 2019, it's a different story there, even though Chris Chuganoff did throw a bunch of touchdowns. Shout out to Chugs. But it's not such a huge disparity between the starter and the backup, or, whatever that level is. And so you've got some similar guys. And as Ryan Day said, they can all do the same thing. And whenever we've talked to them in the past about, you have to change things up for this quarterback. And it's the Ohio State offense. We'll do whatever the quarterback does well. And it's like, now they can just, there's no reason to change things dramatically or drastically with these guys. The more dramatic change is with the freshmen and maybe Lincoln Kienholz to some aspect, that they can only do so much. And we saw that Lincoln Kienholz can run the heck out of the ball, but that was not the issue against Missouri. It's the other things that that is the real factor here.
Yeah, and for Lincoln Kienholz, a lot of those issues had to do with the offensive line. So that'll be a whole different show, which we can break down, handicap where things stand, because there's some questions on the offensive line for the Buckeyes as well. Buckeyes certainly dealing with questions and with players that a lot of other teams would absolutely kill to have. These are the candidates for the places where there are questions this spring or heading into this summer. Not terrible problems for Ohio State as compared to a number of other top programs around the nation. Shaping up to be a really, really interesting year in Columbus. We all love a good quarterback battle, don't we, folks? We see the numbers. We know you do. Always fun to talk about. Always fun to watch and to handicap. Heading into what could be a very memorable season and in Columbus, Ohio. And we will be there to cover all of it. Tony, Kevin, and I covering the team at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Mark covering recruiting. And our whole team of X's and O's gurus making you a smarter football fan. Kevin and Mark hitting the road for their Southern Swing coming up. Lots of content coming up with some of the top recruits in the nation, especially down south. Talking, getting to meet them, talk to them, find out more about them, what makes them tick, what they're going to be basing those decisions on, talk to their coaches. This is where a lot of the intel that pays off down the line, a lot of the relationships that pay off down the line, that all happens right now, and it's all happening at BuckeyeHuddle.com. This is kind of the slow time of year at a lot of sites. Not at BuckeyeHuddle.com. We got a lot of stuff coming for you for that Southern Swing. We've also got our annual subscription sale running on right now. That's where you can get access to our site, to our whole team of insiders, our message board, all of that good stuff at a deeply discounted rate. I think at 40% off or so right now, just for the next couple weeks. But this would be a great time to take advantage of it, to get all that access to all that information from Southern Swing. We're heading into camp season next month, and then media days coming in mid-July, and then camp opens in early August, and bing, bang, boom. Who knows? Here we are, another Ohio State football season coming up. So sign up for that annual membership. You get access to all of that good stuff, all at BuckeyeHuddle.com. That'll do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.